How's it going? Today we're going to start building out the website portion of our project to add some really basic functionality. We're not going to add anything fancy, but we do want to add some ability for users to add our bot onto their servers. To accomplish this, we're going to build two new services, one front end and one back end. The front end web service is going to be hosted on localhost port 3000, and it's going to be built using the Next.js framework as well as React.js. On this web server, we're only going to add a single button for now, and that button is going to allow the user to add the bot into their own server. The backend plays a really critical role in handling the authentication piece of this entire flow. We're going to utilize an external library called Passport, which is going to make OAuth 2 implementation super simple from our end. We're also going to be relying heavily on the Discord API as part of this piece so that we can actually implement the authentication part of it. When the user clicks the login button, we're going to redirect their browser to localhost port 4000, which is the backend web service, and then the auth Discord path. For the auth Discord handler on the backend web service, we're going to be utilizing the Passport library to generate that unique URL if you recall from video 1 when we first added the bot onto our own server. Once we generate that URL, we're going to redirect the user again, but this time we're going to send them to a Discord authentication page. Now, if you've ever tried to log into a website using Google or Facebook login, this is essentially the same type of screen that we're going to end up seeing. This double redirection is going to happen so quickly that the user's not even going to realize that it's happening. But finally, the user is going to be presented with a Discord authentication page where they're going to be asked if they want to grant permission to our application and if they want to add our bot onto their own server. Once they click yes or no, Discord's going to redirect them to our localhost port 4000 auth Discord callback handler. And from there, depending on if they successfully added the bot or not, we're going to redirect them to the index page on the front end. Before we start building out the website, let's actually go ahead and restructure our repository a little bit. I want to store both the code for our bot and our website in the same repository just so it's a convenient place for us to go to. But remember, before we start doing any development work, let's make a new branch. Now I'm going to go ahead and make two new folders. One for the bot and one for the site. Now from here, I'm going to go ahead and move all of the code that we have for our bot into that bot folder. And now we're ready to start developing out the code for our website. Now for the website, we have two different components. We have both the front end and the back end. So let's go ahead and make two separate folders so that we can separate out those code bases. Now our first goal is to get the backend functionality implemented and working. So that's what we're going to focus on first. To do that, we're going to go ahead and create a new node package. So I'm going to go ahead and get into that directory first of all. And then we can go ahead and run npm init to initialize a new project. I'm okay with backend as being the package name. And I'll leave all of that as the default. Now we have a package.json file in here. We also need to make an additional file called index.js. And this is where the logic for our backend server is actually going to go. Before we start writing anything in here, we need to install some additional packages that we're going to be using to build our backend server. One of those is going to be Express. We're also going to install Passport, as well as something called Passport Discord. And once we've installed those, if we actually take a look at our package.json file, we'll notice that all of those dependencies that our application requires are noted in this file as well. Now we're actually ready to start building out the functionality for our backend. Let's head over to our index JavaScript file and start implementing the logic here. The first thing we're going to do is require our Express package, which is going to let us actually set up a web server. And then we're going to initialize app, which is going to be an instance of our Express server. I'm going to initialize a variable called port, and this is the port that our web server is going to run on. And we'll also initialize and require our passport library. From this point on, we don't really need to do too much more to get our actual web server running. We just need to call the listen function on our app object. We're going to pass in the port 4000. And the second is the callback function. Essentially, this is a function that's going to get called when the actual web server is up and running. For us, we don't need to do too much, but I might want to print a message out to the console just so I know that the web server is ready. Now if we go down to our terminal and we go into our backend directory, which we already are, we can just go ahead and do no dot, and that will go ahead and start our web server running on port 4000. Now if we head on over to our actual browser and we go to localhost 4000, we're going to notice that we actually get some feedback. The web server says that it cannot get slash, which is totally fine because we haven't made that route yet, but this does mean that our web server is working. Now if we head on back over to our code, we're going to start setting up the functionality so that we can implement OAuth 2 with Discord. First thing we're going to want to do is make a new folder under backend, and we're going to name it config. In this config folder, I'm going to make a new file, and I'm going to name it passport setup. In this file, we're going to put all of the logic for actually communicating with the Discord OAuth 2 endpoints. First thing we're going to do is require from our passport library. And we also want to go ahead and import from our passport Discord library that we also installed earlier. Now, Passport provides a lot of functionality to a lot of different APIs. For example, Twitter and Facebook. For us, we don't care about authenticating to those types of websites. What we want to authenticate to is Discord. So the Discord strategy is a specific way that we're going to implement authentication to Discord. Now I'm going to actually leave all of the values for these inputs blank for now, and we'll come back to them. And the last thing I want to do is implement a serialization function. Okay, now we want to go back and fill in all of these values that we left unfilled in right here. We can get all of those values from the Discord Developer API. So let's find our application, click bot, and the other thing that we want to do is actually enable this requires OAuth 2 code grant option. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And if we click OAuth 2 up here, we're going to see client ID, client secret. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy those. And we'll reset our secret here as well. And I'll copy that into there as well. Now, callback URL and scope. Let's first talk about the scope. For the scope, if we go and click URL generator, the scopes are all of the different types of permissions that we're allowed to ask a user for. They're totally okay to say no to any single one of these. But for bare minimum use case for our application, we definitely need bot and we need identify. So with those in mind, I'm going to go ahead and go back to our scope and I'm going to enter in those in here directly. Now let's talk about our callback URL. If you recall the diagram, the callback URL is going to be the web server at a different path. Now, the path that we're going to expect to have here is going to be auth discord callback. Now, I can copy this, and at the same time, I need to click OAuth 2 general, and we need to add a new redirect, and that redirect needs to be the exact same thing that we entered into our passport configuration. From here I can go and click save, and now we're done editing this file and it's good to go. Now the rest of the logic that we need to implement is going to be back in our index file. The first thing we need to actually do is make sure that our app uses Passport so that it can invoke all of the necessary requirements for utilizing Passport. Now I need to make two new routes, one for auth discord and one for the callback. Now what this line is going to do, it's going to make auth discord a valid path that we can access from our browser. It's going to be safeguarded by Passport's authentication using the discord method. The permissions is something that we can supply ourselves, and it's something that we need to supply. If we head back over to the Discord developer page, we're going to want to click URL generator. And then we're going to click bot. And now we get this additional ability to specify specific permissions that we want our bot to have when a user adds it to their server. We actually just want it to have administrator. I need to select a redirect URI, and then we need to go through this URI at the very end or somewhere in here, and we're looking for permissions. In this case, it's 8. So I'm going to come back here, and I'm just going to go ahead and put 8. Now we can start our web server, restart it, and now we can try to access auth discord. And in this case, the request failed because I forgot to actually include our passport configuration. So let's head back over and make sure that we include that passport file that we created. And there you go. You might not have caught it, but as soon as I went to that page, it redirected me to this Discord page where I have the ability to add a bot to a server. Now I only have access to one server that I'm in, and so that's the one server that I can add the bot to. And if I go through here, we're going to see that exact permission that I mentioned. We're requesting that a bot get access to administrator permission. Now I can click authorize here, and as soon as I clicked authorize, it redirected us back to that page that we specified in the Discord developer website. The only thing is we haven't added a handler for it yet. So let's go back and make sure we add that in there. So there's one of two scenarios here. If the callback indicates that it was a failure, we're going to redirect the user just back to the home page, which is a slash. But in the case that the callback worked successfully as intended, we're going to redirect the user to a new page called slash dashboard. Now I'm not going to add a handler here because that's not what we're going to cover in this video. But from here, we can go ahead and restart our bot and make sure the whole flow is working. Let's go back to our Discord server and let's kick the bot out of the server. Now there's no bot in here, but once I go through this process, we should see the bot back in here. I'm going to go to the URL and we're going to go to auth Discord. It's going to redirect us to the OAuth 2 page. I will add the bot to the server and click continue. I want to make sure I give the bot administrator permissions. I will click authorize. And it redirects us to the dashboard page where we see a little notification on our Discord website. And there we go. The bot is back in our server. Now that we have our backend web functionality working just like we expect, we can start developing our front-end web UI. First thing I'm actually going to do is delete this front-end folder because it's going to get automatically recreated anyway. So once I delete that, make sure I'm in the site directory, and now we can go and run npx create next app at latest, and this will create us a Next.js app for React.js. I'm going to name the project front-end. And that's going to automatically recreate that front-end folder underneath the site folder. And if we expand this, we're going to start seeing our package files here. And the rest of our files for a really basic front-end web server. Now that all of those dependencies are installed, we can go ahead and cd into the front-end folder. And we can run npm run dev. This is going to start our front-end web server. Now if I go to my browser and I go to localhost 3000, this is our front-end web UI. Now we're not going to spend too much time modifying this. We don't need it to look super pretty. We just need some really basic functionality. I'm thinking we'll add a login button, and once you click it, we'll go through the authentication workflow that we set up for the backend. Let's go back to our code editor. We can go to pages and index. And this JavaScript file is going to contain all of the logic that we just saw on that front-end web page in React.js. Now for our use case, I'm just going to go ahead and delete all of this. And instead of this text, let's go ahead and create ourselves a button. And for the text of the button, we're just going to type in login. And we can go and get rid of this class name here as well. I can save that. And once you save it, it's automatically going to refresh on the browser. There we go. There's our login button. Now when we click it, it doesn't actually do anything yet. So if we head back here, we're going to create ourselves a new onClick handler. This is a function that's going to get called when someone clicks this button. And when someone clicks this button, what we want to happen is to redirect the current web page to that Discord auth web page. We can call the window.open JavaScript function to do exactly this for us. The first parameter is going to be the URL we want to redirect to, and the second parameter is going to be the way we open the web browser. You can open it in a new tab, or you can redirect the current page. For us, we want to make sure we redirect the current page, so we use _self as the target. Now, what do we use for the redirection URL? We want to make sure that it's going to be the backend web server, and specifically the auth Discord endpoint. So we do HTTP localhost, and we need to do the port that the backend web server is running on, which is not 3000 like our web UI, it's 4000. From here, we do auth and Discord. Now, if we head back to our web server, we don't need to refresh anything. We can click login and it should redirect the page. Now, in our case, this isn't working yet because we stopped our backend web server. So let's make sure we open up a new terminal window. Let's go into our site and let's go into the backend and let's go ahead and run node. So we need to have both the backend web server and the front end web server working for this entire process to work like we're expecting. Now, if I go back to the previous page, click login, we redirect just like we expect. We can add it to my server. Now there is one piece missing, the callback URL. When I click authorize, it's going to send us back to the backend URL. What I actually want to happen is instead of sending us to 4000 dashboard, I want to send us back to that front end web UI page that we were showing in the first place. So in order to do this, we need to go to our backend index JavaScript file, and now we need to edit this redirection. Let's do localhost, and we want to do the front end web port, which is 3000, and let's just do a slash. We do need to restart our backend web server for that change to persist. Now let's go ahead and go back to port 3000, show our UI. We can click login. And just to make sure everything's working, I'm going to go back and kick the bot from our server. And now I can add it back to the server, continue, authorize. And there we go, we're redirected back to our front end page. And just like that, the bot's in our server. Now you'll notice this flow is a lot more convenient than what we covered in that very first video. It is so much simpler to get a bot added to your web server by clicking a simple button than having to go and generate a URL, go to the web page, and authorize it that way. Now before we consider this part of the project completed, we need to go back and clean up our code a little bit. One thing that you recall, if we go to our config folder, passport setup, we are hard coding our client ID and our client secret in this file. This is a big no-no, especially when we push these changes up to our Git repository. That means everyone in the world is going to have access to both of these credentials. But we can reuse the same config file that we created when we were developing our bot, and we can make it multi-purpose, so we can use it both for our bot and our website. So first thing we're going to do is go find that config file, which is in the bot directory. I'm going to cut it and move it up into the Discord bot root directory. From there, I'm going to go back to passport setup, and we're going to import client ID and client secret from that file. And we need to go up 3 directories to reference that file. And then we can go ahead and replace both of these with those 2 variables. And the last thing we need to do, if we go back to our config file, we need to now add client secret into this file. I'm going to leave it filled in because I don't want to have to worry about pushing this file up to my repository. And stage 2, going and editing the bot. Now we also need to go back and make sure we update our bot so it uses the new file location. Let's go to bot index.js and let's update this so that it points to the right directory. And in our case, we just need to go up 1 folder to get to the config file. Now that we're done making all of our code changes, we can go ahead and consolidate all of the changes into our branch and then merge those changes into the main branch. So let's make sure we're in the root directory and let's run a git status. This is going to show everything that has changed, and the few things that we want to do is make sure that we add the bot folder and the new site folder, and then we can go ahead and run git status one more time. Now all of these file deletions that Git is picking up is because we moved all of these files from the root directory, which was Discord bot, into a subdirectory of bot. So the other thing that we want to do is make sure now we're going to need to go back and update our gitignore file to reference some of the new paths. For example, database SQLite is not at the root directory, it's underneath the bot folder. And in this case, Node Modules is a folder that exists in a lot of places. For example, you can see it existing under the front end folder. You can also see it existing under the back end folder. So we can use a wildcard. And the wildcard is going to say, regardless of what directory the parent is, if there is a folder called Node Modules, we want to ignore it completely. From here, we can run a git status, and I'm going to add all of the changes in individually. Now in my case, it also thinks I deleted the README, and that's because that's in this directory. I'm going to go ahead and move that up into the root directory as well. Let's run git status, and let's add bot readme.md. And those are all of our changes. We can go ahead and commit these changes. And let's just say added functionality for login. We can go ahead and push all of these changes now up into the mainstream. Since I created the branch locally, the upstream server is not set, but we do get this super useful command from Git that can let us do that automatically. And now that our branch changes are pushed up into the remote repository, let's go ahead and check out main. Let's do a git pull just in case anyone else has edited this repository. In our case, no one has. And now we can go ahead and merge in all of the changes from the branch that we were developing on, which just so happened to be site. And now that we've added all of those changes into our main branch, we can go ahead and do a git status and git push since the commit's already been merged in. And now all of our site development features have been pushed up to the remote repository. Let's go ahead and delete the site branch. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.